So let's talk about Mark Carney. The former head of the Bank of Canada seems to be making a really risky move by engaging with China. I mean, on the surface, it looks like he's thumbing his nose at Canada's biggest ally. But as we're about to see, this isn't a reckless decision at all. It's a deeply calculated gambit, and it's rooted in a really sharp, realist understanding of how the world actually works.
Which brings us to the big central puzzle here, right? The question everyone's asking: why on earth would Canada, a country so deeply fundamentally intertwined with the United States, do something that seems designed to offend its most important partner? It just doesn't seem to add up.
But here's the thing. The answer is way more complex than just simple defiance. This isn't really about offending an ally. It's about securing your own national interest using a pretty sophisticated four-part realist logic. So let's actually get into Carney's head and break this whole thing down.
Okay, so we're going to walk through these four pillars. First, we'll see how Canada is, believe it or not, just following a playbook that was pretty much written by the US and the EU. Second, we'll talk about the deep economic ties that bind Canada and the US so tightly. Third, we'll uncover a kind of hidden deterrent that lives inside the global financial system. And finally, we'll tackle the argument that actually doing nothing is the biggest risk of all.
So, let's jump into pillar number one. It's this idea of political economic separation. And the core concept here is that Carney isn't inventing some radical new strategy. Nope, he's just looking around, seeing how other major Western powers are already playing the game, and deciding it's about time Canada got on the same page.
Now, check this out, because this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the huge disconnect here. You've got the United States' political rhetoric against China, which is, incredibly tough, but then you look at the economic reality, and it's hundreds of billions of dollars in trade every single year. Carney sees this and realizes, wait a second, for Washington, tough talk and big business are two completely separate tracks. They don't have to cross.
And this, right here, illustrates the whole strategic shift. From Carney's point of view, Canada made a really costly mistake for about a decade. They merged these two things. They demanded absolute political loyalty from others, but it came at the expense of their own economic well-being. The new goal? Correct that mistake. Adopt the same kind of pragmatic realism that its allies are already using.
Okay, sure. Even if Canada is just copying the US playbook, you might be thinking, well, doesn't that still open them up to getting slapped down if Washington wants to make an example of them? And that is a fair question. This is where the second pillar of the strategy comes into play, and it's all about just how deeply integrated these two economies are.
This brings us to a brilliant strategic concept, this Chinese idiom, 投鼠忌器. It basically means you hesitate to throw something at a rat because you're scared you'll break the priceless vase sitting right behind it. In this picture, Canada might be the rat, but it's positioned right next to America's own priceless economic vase.
So here's the bottom line. If the US ever decided to sanction Canada, the blowback would be immediate and it would be severe. America's own manufacturing costs would go through the roof. Their energy supply would get massively disrupted, and critical supply chains, we're talking about things like EV minerals and military parts that are essential to US national security, they would be thrown into chaos. Canada isn't just a neighbor, it's a completely irreplaceable link in America's own industrial and security machine.
All right, let's move on to the third strategy, because this builds into something even bigger. We're going to shift gears from the physical world of supply chains to the global financial system. And hidden in plain sight is this powerful, almost unspoken deterrent. And the distinction here is absolutely critical. Look, the US can use its financial power to crush a state like Venezuela without causing too many ripples globally. But Canada is not Venezuela, not even close. Canada is a core pillar of the entire Western financial system, a G7 member in good standing.
So just try to imagine the precedent this would set. If the United States were to use its most extreme financial weapons, the kinds of sanctions that literally unplug countries from the global system, against one of its oldest, closest, most integrated G7 allies,
well, the signal that sends to the rest of the world is, frankly, catastrophic. It would scream to everyone that no US asset, no alliance, is actually safe from a political decision. That would completely shatter the trust that the entire US dollar's global dominance is built on. It's a self-inflicted wound that's just way too costly for any American leader to even think about.
So this is all pretty compelling logic, but it's still a high-stakes game. You might be wondering, wouldn't it just be safer for Canada to, lie low and not make waves? Well, from Carney's perspective, doing nothing is actually the most dangerous option on the table.
According to this line of thinking, just standing still is like a slow, chronic execution.
The fear is that if Canada just stays a passive, totally dependent client state, then sooner or later Washington will start to see it as just an asset sheet, a collection of resources, energy, minerals, manufacturing that can be harvested whenever America needs to fix its own problems.
And honestly, this quote just sums up the entire philosophy perfectly. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. For Carney, diversifying Canada's strategy isn't just about finding a new economic opportunity, it is a straight-up matter of national survival. By engaging with other world powers, Canada isn't just opening a new market, it's creating leverage. It's ensuring it has a seat at the big table instead of ending up on the menu.
So let's pull all four of these pillars together now, because when you combine them, you start to see the foundational philosophy behind this entire gambit. It represents a fundamental shift in how Canada even defines its own national security.
You see, the old model was all about humble loyalty. The idea that your security comes from being an obedient, predictable, and quiet ally. But the new model, Carney's model, argues the true security comes from the value of being needed. If you make yourself indispensable to multiple global powers, you make sure that none of them can actually afford to hurt you.
At the end of the day, this isn't about abandoning an old friend. It's about hedging your bets. Think of it this way. By building these pragmatic economic ties with China, Carney is essentially buying Canada a diversification insurance policy. It's a strategic buffer, a way to protect Canada's own independence and interests in a world that's getting more unpredictable every single day.
And all of this really leaves us with one final big question, one that goes way beyond just Canada. In the world we live in today, where old alliances are constantly shifting and economic power is used as a weapon, what is the true source of a nation's security? Is it unwavering loyalty to one side? Or is it the indispensable value that you can provide to everyone, including your rivals? That's the calculated bet Mark Carney is making.